All Creatures Great and Small, Chapter 54. That night, I sat alone in the big room at Skeldale House and brooded. Siegfried was still away. I had nobody to turn to, and I wished to God I knew what I was going to do with that cow of Dick's in the morning. By the time I went up to bed, I had decided that if nothing further had happened, I would have to go in behind the angle of the jaw with a knife. I knew just where the abscess was, but it was a long way in. And en route, there were such horrific things as the carotid artery and the jugular vein. I tried hard to keep them out of my mind, but they haunted my dreams. Huge, throbbing, pulsating things with their precious contents threatening to burst at any moment through their fragile walls. I was awake by 6 o'clock, and after an hour of staring miserably at the ceiling, I could stand it no longer. I got up and, without washing or shaving, drove out to the farm. As I crept fearfully into the byre, I saw with a sick dismay that Strawberry's stall was empty. So that was that. She was dead. After all, she looked like it yesterday. I was turning away when Dick called to me from the doorway. I've got her in a box on the other side of the yard. Thought she'd be a bit more comfortable in there. I almost ran across the cobbles, and as we approached the door, the sound of the dreadful breathing came out to us. Strawberry was off her legs now. It had cost her the last of her strength to walk to the box, and she lay on her chest, her head extended straight in front of her, nostrils dilated, eyes staring, cheeks puffing in her desperate fight for breath. But she was alive, and the surge of relief I felt seemed to prick me into action, blow away my hesitations. Dick, I said, I've just got to operate on your cow. This thing is never going to burst in time, so it's now or never. But there's one thing I want you to know. The only way I can think of doing it is to go in from behind the jaw. I've never done this before. I've never seen it before. And I've never heard of anybody doing it. If I nick any of those big blood vessels in there, it'll kill her within a minute. She can't last much longer like this, Dick grunted. There's naught to lose. Get on with it. In most operations in large bovines, we have to pull the animal down with ropes and then use general anesthesia. But there was no need for this with Strawberry. She was too far gone. I just pushed gently at her shoulder, and she rolled onto her side and lay still. I quickly infiltrated the area from beneath the ear to the angle of the jaw with local anesthetic, then laid out my instruments. Stretch her head straight out and slightly back, Dick, I said. Kneeling in the straw, I incised the skin, cut carefully through the long, thin layer of the brachiocephalic muscle, and held the fibers apart with retractors. Somewhere down there was my objective, and I tried to picture the anatomy of the region clearly in my mind. Just there, the maxillary veins ran together to form the great jugular, and deeper and more dangerous was the branching, ramifying carotid. If I pushed my knife straight in there behind the mandibular salivary gland, I just about hit the spot. But as I held the razor-sharp blade over the small space I had cleared, my hand began to tremble. I tried to steady it, but I was like a man with malaria. The fact had to be faced that I was too scared to cut any further. I put the scalpel down, lifted a pair of long artery forceps, and pushed them steadily down through the hole in the muscle. It seemed that I had gone an incredibly long way when, almost unbelievingly, I saw a thin trickle of pus along the gleaming metal. I was into the abscess. Gingerly, I opened the forceps as wide as possible to enlarge the drainage hole, and as I did, the trickle became a creamy torrent, which gushed over my hand, down the cow's neck, and onto the straw. I stayed quite still till it had stopped, then withdrew the forceps. Dick looked at me from the other side of the head. "Now what, boss?" he said softly. "Well, I've emptied the thing, Dick," I said, "and by all the laws, she should soon be a lot better. Come on, let's roll her onto her chest again." When we got the cow settled comfortably with a bale of straw supporting her shoulder, I looked almost entreatingly at her. Surely she would show some sign of improvement. She must feel some relief from that massive evacuation. But Strawberry looked just the same. The breathing, if anything, was worse. I dropped the soil instruments into a bucket of hot water and antiseptic and began to wash them. I know what it is. The walls of the abscess have become indurated, thickened and hardened, because it's been there a long time. We'll have to wait for them to collapse. Next day, as I hurried across the yard, I felt buoyantly confident. Dick was just coming out of the loose box, and I shouted across to him, "Well, how is she this morning?" He hesitated, and my spirits plummeted to zero. I knew what this meant. He was trying to find something good to say. "Well, I reckon she's about the same." "But damn it," I shouted, "she should be much better. Let's have a look at her." The cow wasn't just the same, she was worse. And on top of all the other symptoms, she had a horribly sunken eye, the sign usually of approaching death in the bovine. We both stood looking at the grim wreck of the once beautiful cow. Then Dick broke the silence, speaking gently. "Well, what do you think? Is it Malik for her?" The sound of the knacker man's name added the final note of despair, and indeed, Strawberry looked just like any of the other broken-down animals that man came to collect. I shuffled my feet miserably. "I don't know what to say, Dick. There's nothing more I can do." I took another look at the gasping, staring head, the mass of bubbling foam around the lips and nostrils. "You don't want her to suffer any more, and neither do I. But don't get Malik yet. She's distressed, but not actually in pain, and I want to give her another day. If she's just the same tomorrow, send her in." The very words sounded futile. Every instinct told me the thing was hopeless. I turned to go, bowed down by a sense of failure heavier than I'd ever known. As I went out into the yard, Dick called after me, "Don't worry, lad. These things happen. Thank you for all you've done." The words were like a whip across my back. If he had cursed me thoroughly, I'd have felt a lot better. What had he to thank me for with his cow dying back there? The only good cow he'd ever owned. This disaster would just about floor Dick Rudd, and he was telling me not to worry. Then I opened the car door. I saw a cabbage on the seat. Mrs. Rudd, too, was still at it. I leaned my elbow on the roof of the car, and the words flowed from me. It was as if the sight of the cabbage had tapped the deep well of my frustration, and I directed a soliloquy at the unheeding vegetable in which I ranged far over my many inadequacies. I pointed out the injustice of a situation where kindly people like the Rudds, in dire need of skilled veterinarian assistance, had called on Mr. Harriot, who had responded by falling flat on his face. I drew attention to the fact that the Rudds, instead of hounding me off the place as I deserved, had thanked me sincerely and started to give me some cabbages. I went on for quite a long time, and when I had finally finished, I felt a little better, but not much, because as I drove home, I could not detect a glimmer of hope. If the walls of that abscess had been going to collapse, they would have done so by now. I should have sent her in. She would be dead in the morning anyway. I was so convinced of this that I didn't hurry to Birch Tree next day. I took it in with the round, and it was almost midday when I drove through the gates. I knew what I would find. The usual grim signs of a vet's failure, the box door open and the drag marks where Malik had winched the carcass across the yard on his lorry. But everything was as usual, and as I walked over to the silent box, I steeled myself. The knacker man hadn't arrived yet, but there was nothing surer than that my patient was lying dead in there. She couldn't possibly have hung on till now. My fingers fumbled at the catch as though something in me didn't want to look inside, but with a final wrench, I threw the door wide. Strawberry was standing there, eating hay from the rack. And not just eating it, but jerking it through the bars almost playfully, as cows do when they're really enjoying their food. It looked as though she couldn't get it down fast enough, pulling down great fragrant tufts and dragging them into her mouth with her rasp-like tongue. As I stared at her, an organ began to play somewhere in the back of my mind. Not just a little organ, but a mighty instrument with gleaming pipes climbing high into the shadows of the cathedral roof. I went into the box, closed the door behind me, and sat down in the straw in a corner. I had waited a long time for this. I was going to enjoy it. The cow was almost a walking skeleton, with her beautiful dark roan skin stretched tightly over the jutting bones. The once proud udder was a shriveled purse, dangling uselessly above her hocks. As she stood, she trembled from sheer weakness. But there was a light in her eye, a calm intensity in the way she ate, which made me certain she would soon fight her way back to her old glory. There was just the two of us in the box, and occasionally Strawberry would turn her head towards me and regard me steadily, her jaws moving rhythmically. It seemed like a friendly look to me. In fact, I wouldn't have been surprised if she'd winked at me. I don't know just how long I sat in there, but I savored every minute. It took some time for it to sink in that what I was watching was really happening. The swallowing was effortless. There was no salivation, no noise from her breathing. When I finally went out and closed the door behind me, the cathedral organ was really blasting, with all stops out, the exultant peals echoing back from the vaulted roof. The cow made an amazing recovery. I saw her 3 weeks later, and her bones were magically clothed with flesh. Her skin shone, and most important, the magnificent udder bulged turgid beneath her, a neat little teat proudly erect at each corner. I was pretty pleased with myself, but of course, a cold assessment of the case would show only one thing, that I had done hardly anything right from start to finish. At the very beginning, I should have been down the cow's throat with a knife. But at the time, I just didn't know how. In later years, I've opened many a score of these abscesses by going in through a mouth gag with a scalpel tied to my fingers. It was a fairly heroic undertaking, as the cow or bullock didn't enjoy it and was inclined to throw itself down with me inside it almost to the shoulder. It was simply asking for a broken arm. When I talk about this to the present day young vets, they're inclined to look at me blankly, because most of these abscesses undoubtedly had a tuberculous origin, and since adaptation, they are rarely seen. But I can imagine it might bring a wry smile to the faces of my contemporaries as their memories are stirred. The post-pharyngeal operation had the attraction that recovery was spectacular and rapid, and I have had my own share of these little triumphs, but none of them gave me as much satisfaction as the one I did the wrong way. It was a few weeks after the strawberry episode, and I was back in my old position in the Rudd's kitchen with the family around me. This time I was in no position to drop my usual pearls of wisdom, because I was trying to cope with a piece of Mrs. Rudd's apple tart. Mrs. Rudd, I knew, could make delicious apple tarts, but this was a special kind she produced for allowance time, for taking out to Dick and the family when they were working in the fields. I had chewed at the 2-inch pastry till my mouth had dried out. Somewhere inside there was no doubt a sliver of apple, but as yet I'd been unable to find it. I didn't dare try to speak in case I blew out a shower of crumbs, and in the silence which followed, I wondered if anybody would help me out. It was Mrs. Rudd who spoke up. "Mr. Harriet," she said in her quiet, matter-of-fact way, "Dick has something to say to you." Dick cleared his throat and sat up straighter in his chair. I turned towards him expectantly, my cheeks still distended by the obdurate mass. He looked unusually serious, and I felt a twinge of apprehension. "What I want to say is this," he said. "It'll soon be our silver wedding anniversary, and we're going to have a bit of a do. We want you to be our guest." I almost choked. "Dick, Mrs. Rudd, that's very kind of you. I'd love that. I'd be honored to come." Dick inclined his head gravely. He still looked pretentious, as though there was something big to follow. "Good. I think you'll enjoy it, because it's going to be a right do. We've got a room booked at the King's Head at Carsley." "Gosh, sounds great." "Aye, the missus and me have worked it all out." He squared his thin shoulders and lifted his chin proudly. "We're having a hot dinner and entertainers."